Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome. Happy Monday. Glad to see you all here. Today, we're going to be covering LSAT reading comprehension. But before we dive into it, just do me a favor and type in the chat when you're taking the LSAT. Let me know where you stand. Put a 1 for January, 2 for February, 4 for April, 6 for June. And let me know whether you're struggling more with logical reasoning or reading comprehension, so I know how to orient this conversation and future ones. I'm guiding these classes based on your needs, your requests. So just drop in the chat 1 for January, 2 for February, 4 for April, 6 for June. Type in the chat when you're taking the LSAT so that we can orient this conversation going forward. And let me know whether you're struggling more with logical reasoning or reading comprehension, and I can tailor the conversation accordingly. Hey, user 6102 asking, are we doing practice today? Yeah, we're covering LSAT reading comprehension. That's the agenda. For June, type in the chat when you're taking the LSAT so that we can orient this conversation. Looks like something just replayed here on my end. Whoops, sorry about that. So I see that you're struggling more with reading comprehension. Good to know. Thanks for sharing. You're in the right place since that is what we will be covering today. And so I'm going to go ahead and dive in here on LSAT reading comp. Thanks for sharing. So the idea here for this class is that you don't need to read faster in LSAT reading comp. You just need to read better. That's the key. So let's get into it. I'm going to share a bit of a lesson on LSAT reading comp, and then I'll take your questions associated with that. So you don't need to read faster. Have you ever finished an LSAT reading passage and realized you have no idea what you just read? Like, you hit the end of the paragraph, your eyes worked perfectly fine, but your brain is a total blank screen. You scroll back up, you reread the same lines, and somehow they make less sense the second time. And if that sounds familiar, you're not broken, you're not bad at reading, you're just reading the LSAT the wrong way. Because the truth is, you don't need to read faster to score higher. You just need to read differently. And here's the secret. Every 170 plus LSAT scorer I've coached actually reads slower. They're not speed reading, they are reading for structure. And that one shift from reading words to reading structure is what turns reading comp from this giant anxiety factory into something predictable, almost mechanical. So today's class is about that shift. I'm going to show you how to read LSAT passages without speed reading. We're going to throw out the idea that you need faster eyes and replace it with something 100 times more powerful, a system for clarity. By the end of this session, you're going to be able to slow down, understand more, and actually finish the section with time left over. You're going to have a repeatable system that makes any LSAT passage feel organized, calm, and predictable. You're going to walk away with 4 things you can use today. First, a simple reading lens that turns walls of text into a clean map. We're going to label each paragraph in 1 or 2 words, setup, conflict, and resolution, so you always know where you are and why it matters. Second, you're going to get a main point method you can do in under 20 seconds. It's 1 sentence, plain English, no fluff. If your answer doesn't match that sentence, it's gone. Number 3, I'm going to share with you a question order that front loads the wins. We'll do global questions first, like main idea, purpose, attitude, organization. Then we're going to zoom in for the details only when needed. No more jumping around the passage hoping something sticks. Number 4, I'm going to give you a timing split that doesn't require speed reading. You'll read roughly 3 to 4 minutes to build up the map, 4 to 6 minutes to answer questions, because this timing scheme is flexible, and I'll show you how to adjust it for harder passages without panicking. Now, here's what that means in real life. No more finishing a paragraph and thinking to yourself, wait, what did I just read? No more rereading the whole passage because you missed 1 pivot word, and no more getting fooled by choices that are technically true, but totally off the author's point. Now, before we dive in, I want you to take a second and rate your own current reading comp confidence on a scale of 1 to 10 in the chat. 1 means reading comp is my arch nemesis, it wins every time. 10 means I own reading comp. Be honest here, there's no judgment. I just want a baseline so you can see the change by the end. Now, here's the outcome I want for you by the end. You're going to know exactly what to look for, when to slow down, and what to ignore. You'll feel calmer when reading, faster when answering, and you'll finish with fewer rereads and more points. So the shift here is going from reading sentences to reading for structure. And I'm going to share with you the mental model that makes that happen. The big idea that flips reading comp on its head is to stop reading sentences and start reading structure. What does that mean in plain English? It means instead of trying to understand everything as you go, you're going to track how the passage is built, what each paragraph is doing, where the argument turns, and where the author finally lands. If you can see the skeleton, you don't need to memorize the surface. Think of it like you're walking into a house. Most students look at the paint color and the couch and the art on the wall, but top scorers look for the blueprint, meaning the floor plan. When you know the floor plan, you never get lost. And so here's the lens we're going to use from now on. It's simple and it's fast. First is the role of the paragraph. Every paragraph has a job: setup, conflict, or resolution. Setup gives the background or the problem. Conflict introduces debate, a counter view, or a tension. And a resolution proposes a fix, a synthesis, or the author's take. Second, you've got anchor points. Because you don't need every sentence, you just need the anchors. These are topic sentences that announce a role, pivot words like however, but, yet, and although, which flip the meaning. You have the thesis or the claim, what the author actually believes, and you have the wrap-up line that tells you exactly why the passage exists. Then you have the author's stance. Is the author for it, against it, or is it just complicated? You want to listen for tone words, because a tiny word like unfortunately can reveal the author's stance. Then you've got a one-sentence map. After each paragraph, you say one quick label out loud in your head, like paragraph 1 is the setup, paragraph 2 is the conflict, and paragraph 3 is the resolution. Then at the end, you draft a one-sentence main point in normal human language. That is the structure. So for example, let's say you had a passage where they said, many historians view the painter's late period as a decline, but recent archival work suggests those pieces were deliberate experiments that anticipated modernism. Critics often cite the uneven brushwork as evidence. However, the newly found letters describe a purposeful attempt to disrupt realism. In light of this, the late period should be reassessed as a turning point rather than a retreat. There were a couple of pivot words in that passage. We had the word but, we had the word however, and we had the phrase in light of this. Those all signal a shift and a conclusion. So you had the first sentence was the conflict, old view versus new evidence. Second sentence was support for the new view. And the third sentence was a resolution or the author's take. Now, we don't need to memorize names, dates, or trivia here. We're just grabbing the architecture, the debate, and the author's conclusion. That's what the questions would ask you about. So your new rule of thumb here is if you can't name the paragraph's job in 1 to 3 words, you don't understand it yet. So don't keep reading. Slow down, find the anchor, label the role, then continue. And ironically, the slow labeling up front makes you faster overall because you stop rereading and you stop fighting trick answers. So we're looking for the role, the anchors, the author's stance, and a one-sentence map. That is the blueprint. Now, the big enemy in reading comp is not the passage, but it's your training in school up to this point, because school reading is awesome for essays and textbooks, but it's terrible for the LSAT. School reading tells you to read every sentence carefully, underline a bunch, and try to memorize everything. But on the LSAT, that approach is the wrong tool for the job, because school rewards coverage and the LSAT rewards control. School is asking, did you read it all? The LSAT's asking, do you understand how it's built? In school, the goal is to absorb content so you can discuss it or write about it later. On the LSAT, your goal is to locate the structure so you can predict and eliminate choices right now. If you read to absorb everything, you're going to drown in the details. But if you read to map and get the structure, you can pick the right answer calmly. Another key difference is the unit of meaning. In school, the unit is the individual sentence. On the LSAT, the unit is the paragraph's job. Is it setup, is it conflict, or is it resolution, and what is the author's stance? If you're looking on an individual sentence level, you're gonna miss the argument. If you track the jobs, the passage suddenly makes sense. Another key difference is when you are evaluating what you're reading. In school, they're asking, can you summarize the facts? On the LSAT, they're asking, can you ID what matters and ignore what doesn't? And that skill of strategic ignoring, it feels weird at first, but it's what top scorers do constantly. Now, I know some of you are thinking, if I don't read every detail, won't I miss something important? But the truth is the LSAT repeats what's important. Important ideas are going to show up as thesis statements, pivots like however, and summarizing lines. Details that aren't important are going to get buried. Your job is to trust the architecture, grab the anchors, label the roles, and only dive in for details when a question demands it. Now I'm going to read a passage in two different ways. First, the school reading way, and then the LSAT reading way. First paragraph. Early climate models were criticized for their limited regional sensitivity, which purportedly undermined their utility for policy design. However, subsequent iterations incorporated higher resolution data and ensemble techniques, allowing for... I'll stop there. How's your brain? If you're trying to hold in all that detail like regional sensitivity, utility, ensemble techniques, and we're not even at the point yet. Now let's try it the LSAT reading way. Same content with a lens for structure. If they say, some people used to doubt climate models. However, newer versions fixed the flaw, therefore, we should rethink their value. If you feel that difference, we're keeping the argument, not the jargon. We heard the conflict, used to doubt, the pivot, the keyword however, and the resolution, newer versions fixed it. Therefore, we rethink the value. That is the map. If they ask for a detail later, we go fetch it with our blueprint or our map in mind. Now, you don't need to memorize the nouns to win, but you do need to track the verbs, what each paragraph does, the setup, the conflict and the resolution, the thesis, the pivot word, and the wrap-up. Those actions are what the questions test. So if you've been finishing passages and thinking to yourself, I remember sentences but not the point, it's not you, it's just how you're reading. School reading built a strong muscle that is pulling the wrong way here, and we've got to retrain it. Two simple rules for you on this. If you can't name the paragraph's job in 1 or 3 words, you don't understand it yet. So don't keep going, find the pivot, label the role, and then continue. And second, if a detail feels heavy, give it a return ticket, meaning you mark it mentally and you move on. If a question needs it, you're going to come back with purpose instead of panicking. So now I'm going to give you the 3 jobs of a paragraph, the setup, the conflict, and the conclusion. Every paragraph has one job. Setup is the background, the context, or a problem statement. It's the author saying, here's the world we're in, or here is the issue on the table. It's going to sound neutral. They're giving definitions, the background, the history, like for example, they'll say, for decades, or researchers have long believed, or recently. And so what you do is you get oriented and you write a 1-word purpose in your head, like context or problem. The second job is conflict. There's tension, a debate, a counter view shows up, or the author pivots away from the status quo. Pivot words like however, but, yet, although, nevertheless, still, or despite, or a new camp enters, like saying some scholars argue, or critics claim, or this view has been challenged. And so what you do is you perk up. You label it debate or counter, and your brain should go, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Now the third job is the resolution. This is where the author proposes a take, a synthesis, or a fix. Sometimes it's subtle, but it's there. So they're going to say, therefore, thus, this suggests, in light of this, the best explanation accordingly. And you're also going to hear tone words like unfortunately, promising, or misguided. And so what you want to do is you capture the author's stance in plain English, one short sentence. The author thinks X because Y. That is the entire game: setup, conflict, resolution. Now, here are two quick spotting tricks you can use immediately. First is the topic sentence test. The first one or two lines of a paragraph usually advertise the job. If the opener feels neutral and scene setting, you want to think setup. If it picks a fight or introduces doubt, think conflict. If it sounds like a conclusion or a prescription, think resolution. Also, verbs are more important than nouns. Heavy nouns like jurisprudence, typology, ensemble technique, those are going to pull you down. The jobs are being carried by verbs, so focus on the verbs like argue, challenge, propose, or conclude. You want to track verbs and pivots, not the weight of the vocabulary. Now, here's what this does for you in the questions. Organization and structure questions become easy because you've already labeled the flow. The main point becomes your resolution sentence, and purpose becomes your setup resolution combo, which is why the passage needed to be written. And function questions become easy because you can say, oh, that sentence lives in a conflict paragraph. It is supplying a counterexample. Now I'm going to share with you the 5 essential labels. They are thesis, evidence, counterpoint, author's view, and purpose. These are the functions of specific portions of the passage. The thesis is the claim the author wants you to accept. In many passages, it lives in the resolution paragraph or near the end, and sometimes it's foreshadowed earlier. They're going to say, therefore, thus, this suggests, or we should. And so what you want to do is capture it in one sentence with normal language, no jargon, no quotes. For example, the author says, the decline period was actually innovative. Then you have the evidence. These are the reasons, the examples, or the data supporting the thesis. Your clue that you're dealing with evidence would be words like, for example, as shown by, or specific quotations from sources. They're going to give you numbers. They're going to give you studies. And you're going to label this as E for evidence and keep moving. You don't want to get bogged down or stuck. Then you've got counterpoints. These are opposing views or critiques of the author's position, or in old conventional view, the author is going to overturn. They're going to say, some scholars argue, or critics claim, or a common objection is, blah, blah, blah. And so you tag it as C for counterpoint, and you listen for how the author answers it later. Then you have the author's view. This is the stance and the tone. Could be positive, could be negative, could be nuanced. It could appear in little words like unfortunately, promising, misguided, overlooked, or elegant. And it matters because attitude and purpose questions hinge on the author's attitude. So you want to summarize it in one adjective like approving, skeptical, cautious, or admiring. Then you've got purpose questions. This is the why of the passage. Why did the author write this? Did they want to correct a misconception or propose a newer model or reframe of a debate? And this often will come at the very end, or it's implied by the transition from conflict to resolution. And so in one phrase, you summarize it like they want to reassess X, propose Y, or clarify Z. Now, setup paragraphs often contain the seeds of the purpose, why the topic matters, and sometimes counterpoint seeds like existing views to help set the stage. The conflict paragraph will almost always contain the counterpoint and frequently the evidence for that counterpoint. Then the resolution houses the thesis plus the evidence for it and reveals the author's view most clearly. And so when you read with both the jobs and the labels, you might have paragraph 1 is the setup with the old view of the counterpoint plus a hint of purpose. Paragraph 2 might contain a conflict and evidence for the critics, and so on. Now, here are 2 common mistakes and how we fix them. The first mistake is confusing evidence with thesis. Students often grab the proof and they think it's the point. You want to keep those separate. The fix here is to see if you see at the end of the paragraph with thus, therefore, or in light of, that's going to likely be the thesis. So you want to ask, is this the claim or is it just a reason for a bigger claim? The second big mistake is missing the author's view because it's only a tone word. A tiny word like unfortunately can flip an entire paragraph from neutral to critical. So when you hear a tone word, pause for half a second and tag it with A for author. And that micro pause will save you on attitude and purpose questions. Now I'm going to pause here for just a moment. Any questions at all regarding what I've shared so far? Any questions at all of clarification, confusion, any struggles you're facing with LSAT reading comprehension? Take a moment, drop your questions in the chat. I'll get to as many of them as I can. And that will help how I shape the next part of this going forward. And Tia's asking in the chat here on TikTok, do you have a YouTube video on this? And so, yes and no. Broadly speaking, I have plenty of videos on LSAT reading comprehension in particular, but none on this exact topic of how to improve on reading comp without reading faster. That's the agenda for today. And so I'm recording that video in real time right now, so you'll be able to access this on the YouTube channel after this live is over. A Journey with Sabo is asking, what time do I go live? Every single weekday, same time, same place here on YouTube and TikTok, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. And by the way, if you find this helpful, please spread the word. The only way these lives grow is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these, and the algorithm doesn't really boost lives because they can't run ads during them. And if you want to help me talk you through your situation, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody out there watching this. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. For today, I should be able to go at least an hour in total. I was a little bit sick last week, so I was a little bit shorter, but I think today I can go the full hour. And so I'll go the full hour, maybe even a little bit longer if folks have enough questions for me. Sanchez is asking, how do we tackle word and context problems using this same strategy? Fantastic question. I'll get to that in a little bit. The overall point I would have is you want to read for context ultimately. So if they're asking for the definition of a particular word, you look a bit above, you look a bit below, and that's going to give you a sense of what the overall agenda is or purpose is for that passage. Wet Diaper is asking, when should I start studying for the LSAT? I'm in my first year of college at the moment. Awesome. Love that you're planning ahead. I'll answer this with a reading comp lens in mind here. Ultimately, you want to read difficult, dense text to set the stage for how they're going to test you on reading comprehension. So there are 400 real official LSAT reading comprehension passage approximately, and they're all published on LSAC's Law Hub platform. The exams are numbered 101 to 159, 101 being the older, 159 being the newer. And so more recent is more relevant. So I would recommend using up some of the older passages for more casual, untimed work to get yourself some exposure to the language of the LSAT. So take exams 101 to 110, for example, print them out, read them untimed, whenever you would normally read something else, and just give yourself some exposure to the difficult language that LSAC uses, because they take older passages and they reword them and rephrase them in LSAT language to make them more boring, for lack of a better word. So you want to just expose yourself to that style of writing and your ability to test yourself on your ability to navigate the difficult dense text. Rama's asking strategies for answering difficult main topic questions on reading comp. I'm definitely going to get to that, so stay tuned for that. Chelsea's asking, can you submit a GMAT score instead of an LSAT score for law school? No, I don't think you can. GMAT's for business school, and maybe for a dual degree JD MBA you could, but not for law school specifically. Doyfels is asking, switch my undergrad from history to finance with a minor in history. Is there anything I should do? Maintain the highest GPA possible. Law school admissions is primarily GPA plus LSAT, and so don't do anything that could tank your GPA if law school is your sole or your primary focus. Wade is asking, did they take out logic games? Yes. So after the June of 2024 LSAT, they removed logic games and replaced it with a second scored logical reasoning section. So don't study logic games. Don't use old materials that contain outdated logic games references. They're not up to date. You want to use materials that are related to the current LSAT format. So I'm going to continue going deeper on reading comp with today's lesson, specifically on anchors. And so The students who do the best on reading comp, they mark very little and sometimes not even at all. And so for this reason, you don't need to mark every single sentence. You've got to catch the anchor points, the places where meaning lives. If you miss the anchors, the passage becomes a bit more slippery. And there are 4 anchors we need to focus on. That's it. The first anchor is the topic sentence, the opening 1 or 2 lines that announce what the paragraph is going to do. It usually tells you the paragraph's job. Is it setup? Is it conflict? Is it resolution? And so as you read the first line, silently label the job in 1 to 3 words. Is it context? Is it debate? Or is it resolution? If the opener is neutral info, think setup. If it picks a fight, think conflict. If it sounds conclusive or prescriptive, think resolution. Your second anchor is the pivot. Words like however, but, yet, although, nevertheless, still, despite, in contrast, or on the other hand. And pivots flip meaning. Before the pivot is the old direction. After the pivot is the new direction, and this is often the author's real take. And so when you hear a pivot, slow down for 2 seconds and ask, what changed? Tag it C if it introduces a counter view, or move toward a T or an A if it reveals the author's stance. Then third, you have your thesis markers. Words like therefore, thus, so, it suggests, it follows that, accordingly, we should, I argue, the best explanation is, because these are all claims the author wants you to take home. So you want to translate the sentence into plain English in your head. 1 sentence with no jargon, that is your main point prototype. And if you see a chain like evidence, pivot, and then a thesis, you've just hit the core of the passage. Then your fourth anchor is the wrap-up or the purpose lines, which is telling you why this exists. They'll say things like, in light of this, or consequently we should reconsider. That is revealing the purpose of the passage, why the author wrote the piece at all. So you tag the reason why in one phrase like reframe Y, propose X, or correct Z. Now, the students who mark the least tend to do the best. The goal is not to make a pretty page full of notes, it's to make a useful map you can use to answer questions fast. You can do this mentally or with tiny notes, but either way, keeping it minimal, just enough to lock in the anchors so your brain doesn't drift. And when you're solving the questions, global followed by local. Most students do the reverse. They get into tiny little details and lines, and then they lose the plot. But I want you to start off by getting the plot, then using it to find the right lines. When I say global, I mean building the map, finding out the job of each paragraph. Is it setup, conflict, or resolution? What are the anchors? The topic sentence, the pivots, the thesis, the purpose, and the author's stance. This is your 30,000-foot view. Then the local is zooming into specific lines when a question asks for them. The definitions, the examples, the dates, the weird jargon, or a particular claim inside a paragraph. If you start off local, you're guessing at what matters, but you don't really know. But if you start global, you know what matters and where it lives. Now here's the flow I want you to run on every passage. First, you have your global pass in 3 minutes. You're reading for the jobs and the anchors. You're articulating a 1-word purpose per paragraph. You're underlining 1 thesis line, bracketing the pivots, tagging for the tone. Then you're drafting a 1-sentence main point in plain English. Then you sweep the questions global first, local sentence. Global questions are like main idea, primary purpose, passage organization, best title, tone, author's attitude. Then you're hitting the local and detail questions and finally saving the inference ones for last. When you're solving local questions, you do local retrieval, meaning you're going right to the specific paragraph instantly because you labeled it, you're reading a few lines around the target, and you're reattaching the detail to the paragraph's job and the author's stance. Then you're going to choose the answer that fits both the line and the map. And notice that none of this requires speed reading. It just requires the proper sequence. And there are 3 reasons this works so well. First, wrong answers are often globally wrong. They contradict the author's stance, they exaggerate the scope, or they flip the main point. Your map kills them before you even check the specific line. The second big reason is that locals become fast when you already know the neighborhood. If they're asking you, where would a counterexample live, you know it's in the conflict paragraph. And the third big reason is there are no more panic rereads. You stop rereading the whole passage to answer one micro question because your map tells you exactly where to look. Now let's talk about how 170 plus scorers actually think on LSAT reading comp. It's a mental loop they run over and over. They predict, they label, they ignore, and they confirm. That loop keeps them calm. The first mindset rule is you assume structure until proven otherwise. Top scorers expect a setup, a conflict, followed by resolution. They're not surprised by pivots, they're waiting for them. Internal dialogue sounds like, okay, paragraph 1 is probably context. When's the fight and where's the turn? The second mindset rule is you name it or you don't move on. In other words, if you can't name the paragraph's job in 1 to 3 words, you do not plow ahead. You slow down for 10 seconds, you find the pivot or the thesis, and you label it. If you're fuzzy on paragraph 2, you rewind one line, you see the word however, and so you know that's the conflict, and you move on. The third mindset rule is details get a return ticket, meaning you flag it and you come back when you need to. Dates and names are not the point. You'd come back later. Fourth mindset rule is that tone is a compass. Tiny words like unfortunately, promising, or misguided tell you where the author lives. Top scorers use the tone to nuke answers that are globally wrong. If the tone is cautiously positive, any answer saying it's harsh criticism, you knock it out. And the fifth mindset rule is you want to pick the answer that fits both the line and the map. In other words, if an answer fits the line but violates the author's stance or a passage scope, it's wrong. And if it matches the tone but misreads the actual sentence, it's wrong. And this is the shift that changes everything. You stop hoping you feel the right answer and you start proving choices wrong based on your map, based on your blueprint. This is a repeatable process regardless of the topic. Now let's talk about skeletons. You ask yourself 3 questions and that's it. And you keep these looping in the background as you read the passage. What's the point? What's the problem? And how does the author resolve it? You run this in your head every 30 seconds as you read. You just ask these questions over and over. What's the point? Is the claim the author wants you to take home. That is your main point prototype. You usually hear it near the end or right after the strongest evidence. You listen for words like thus, therefore, this suggests, the best explanation. And so when you hear this, you translate to human in one sentence. Author says X because Y, that is it. The second question is, who disagrees or what is the problem? Every good passage has tension, either a rival camp, a misconception, or a gap in the old model. You want to listen for words like however, but, critics argue, despite, or nonetheless. When you hear this, you name the opponent or the obstacle in 3 to 6 words, like data seems inconsistent or critics say it's trivial. Then finally you ask the third question, how does the author resolve this? This is the move the author makes to answer the pushback. New evidence, reframing, a better explanation, a condition, or a synthesis. You listen for keywords like therefore, thus, in light of this, best understood as, or a more accurate view. When you hear this, you ID the resolution type, like new evidence, a reframe, a condition, or a synthesis, and you state the author's stance in one short line. If you can answer those 3 questions at any time, you're never lost and you've got the core. Now, the quiet boss of reading comp is the author's voice and their bias, because on the LSAT, the author rarely shouts their opinion, they whisper it. But if you can hear those whispers, you can crush attitude, purpose, and a ton of main point traps. The idea in plain English is that you don't need to decode every single sentence. You've just got to ask how the author feels about the main claim or the debate. And that feeling, like positive, negative, or neutral, acts like a compass. It tells you which answers can't be true even if they sound smart. So you tag voice with a 3-symbol system, plus, minus, or equals. Plus is approving, optimistic, or supportive. Minus is critical, skeptical, or dismissive. And equals is kind of in the middle, mixed or nuanced or cautious. Just pick a symbol, plus, minus, or equals, and you move on. Now the question is, how do you hear that voice? You listen for the tone words, little adverbs and adjectives that the LSAT loves. They'll be near the thesis, near the pivots, or in wrap-up lines. Positive words, I'll give you a list here. Promising, fruitful, compelling, elegant, illuminating, persuasive, significant, robust, foundational, overlooked, richness, and underappreciated. Negative words, where the author is pushing back, would be like misguided, untenable, flawed, merely, only, simplistic, naive, exaggerated, overstated, premature, or trivial. And neutral words would be like nonetheless, limited, tentative, partial, contingent, conditionally, or to a degree. And rewind if you missed any of those later. Now, one tone word can flip the whole paragraph. Now let's talk through common mistakes. The first big one is chasing every detail. If you've ever caught yourself underlining half the passage, trying to memorize names, dates, and weird terms, then you're finishing the paragraph and thinking to yourself, what's the point? That's this mistake. If you try to hold everything, you drop everything. Reading comp does not reward memory. It rewards control. And control comes from structure, not details. Now, detail chasing is like when you underline 3 examples in a row because they look important. You pause on a technical phrase and reread it twice, even though you don't know how it connects. Or you finish paragraph 1 and you can recite a date, but not what the author is trying to do. Now, this is going to kill your score because, first off, details aren't a map. Examples, dates, and quotes are only evidence. They support something. But without the thesis in the paragraph's job, you don't know what they support. The second big issue is that details multiply. Every passage has more details than you could ever store. And if you try to hold them, your working memory floods and you panic. Your accuracy drops and your speed drops. The third big issue is that details are weaponized in wrong answers. The LSAT loves true but irrelevant traps, statements that appear in the passage but do not answer the question asked. If you chase details, those traps feel familiar, so you pick them. So instead, we label, we anchor, and we defer. You label the paragraph's job in 1 to 3 words, again, setup, conflict, and resolution. You anchor the pivots and the thesis, you bracket the turn, and you underline the claim. Then you defer the example, meaning you give it a return ticket, like you'll come back if a question asks for it. So you find the point first, and you get the example later. I'll take a pause for a minute, I'll have a drink of water, and feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Wade is asking, this will be on YouTube, correct? I'm trying to take notes, but it's going kind of fast. Yeah, this will be on the YouTube channel both now and later. Link is in my bio on TikTok. And by the way, if you want to talk through your situation, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody out there watching this now or later. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer, free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody out there watching this. I'll help you craft a personal plan of attack for your LSAT situation. Whenever you're taking it, I know we got a bunch of folks here taking the LSAT coming up in the next few months, January, February, April, or June, whatever your situation is, I'll be happy to help you out. And if you find these lives helpful, I offer them every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, both on YouTube and on TikTok. Linda's asking, I'm a senior graduating Friday. Congratulations. I didn't take my LSAT yet. Is it too late? Should I wait? No, not too late. You could take the LSAT in January or February and still apply to law school this cycle if you'd like, or you could take it in April or June and apply first thing next cycle. Totally fine. And by the way, LSAT scores are good for 5 years. So no rush to apply to law school even when you have taken the LSAT. Feel free to keep those questions coming and I'll get to as many as I can. And if anything I shared on reading comp so far wasn't clear, I'm happy to elaborate. I'm going to keep going talking about pivot words in reading comp. Now, a pivot is a turn signal. One tiny word flips it around. If you miss the pivot, you're going to read the old view and choose the opposite of what the author actually believes. Before the pivot word is the old direction, and after the pivot word is the real direction. Classic pivot words are words like however, but, yet, although, nevertheless, still, despite, in contrast, on the other hand, rather than, instead, nonetheless, or whereas. These are your score words. If you hear one, you should pay attention and sit up straight. And when you hit a pivot word, you want to run the 2-2 rule. Take a 2-second pause, don't rush, and treat the pivot like a yellow light. You're asking 2 questions here. From what to what? So the direction before the pivot and the direction after the pivot, the new job, the new direction. Then you label the paragraph's job, likely a conflict or a resolution, and then you move on. So for example, let's say we had a passage where they said, many historians view the reforms as minor housekeeping. However, docket data shows access expanded. So we're going from what? Minor housekeeping to what? Access expansion, more significant. So the job here is a conflict, and we know a resolution is going to emerge. So when you're marking, even if minimally, you want to make the pivots loud. You bracket the pivot word itself, or you jot it down in your notes like however or but. You underline the first clear thesis that follows, and if the tone shifts with it, you tag plus, minus, or equals for positive, negative, or neutral. And that is it. Just one bracket, one underline, one tag of the tone. So now that you can map a passage, we're going to jump into the questions because not all questions are created equal. Some love the global map, others require a more local fetch going back to the passage. So 2 big families, global and local. Global questions include main point, primary purpose, passage organization, title, tone, author's opinion. These are all the new pivot after the fact. Main point questions ask, what is the author's central claim? To answer it, go back to your 1-sentence thesis, usually near words like thus and therefore. For purpose words, asking why did the author write this, for those questions, it's asking for the author's why at a 10,000-foot view. Then for attitude and tone questions, they're asking you how does the author feel? You're using your plus, minus, or equals tag from earlier. And for the organization, structure, tone questions, they're asking how is the passage built? So you're going off of your labels here, setup, conflict, and resolution. Those are all global. Then separately, we have local questions, like for example, function, role of a sentence. They're asking you, why is this line here? You want to ID the paragraph's job first, then name the line's job. For example, they are conceding, they are qualifying, they are concluding, they are providing an example, they are introducing a counterpoint. When you have detail or specific reference questions, they're asking, what does X say or what does X mean? You're looking 2 lines above, then the target line, maybe 1 or 2 lines below, and you translate into regular English. They're asking you essentially, what does the line mean in this paragraph's job? Then you have your inference questions asking, what overall must be true? You're looking for the safest answer that follows from the map or the blueprint. You're not leaping beyond the scope of the passage. If they're asking you for an analogy or what is most similar, they're looking for which scenario mirrors the logic of this passage or this paragraph. You want to reduce the relevant structure to a template. For example, old view, new evidence, a reframe or a problem, a method, and followed by the result. You want to match the template, not the nouns, not the topic. Your job here is to ask, does this option preserve the sequence and the turn or the flip? So overall, we read the passage in about 3 minutes. We're mapping for the structure, the skeleton. Then we're passing through global questions first, local second. Global would be main point, purpose, attitude, and organization. Second pass, we're doing local questions like function, detail, inference, analogy, and maybe comparative ones if it's a dual passage. Now let's talk about main point questions. You're finding the last turn, meaning the final pivot or the shift. You're grabbing the claim right after it, the thesis marker like thus, therefore, this suggests, or we should, we are translating to human in one sentence, like author says X because Y. Then we are trimming the fat. We are removing examples, numbers, and proper nouns, keeping only the main idea. That is the entire method. That's main point in a nutshell. So to find the last turn, most passages go from setup to conflict to resolution. The last pivot with the word however, nonetheless, or yet usually hands the mic to the author. So your question is again, where is the last turn? Then we grab the claim. Right after the turn, we listen for thesis markers like therefore, thus, this suggests, accordingly, best understood as, or we should. That sentence or two would be your main point source. Then we translate to human, we remove the jargon, the quotes, boil it down to one sentence. Author says new view because reason or evidence. Then we trim the fat, we strip out the names, the dates, and the lists, keep only the direction and the why. So some templates for main point questions. First is the reframe. Old view says X, but new evidence shows Y. Therefore, the subject is best understood as Z. Second template is solving a problem. Like, there's a problem or a gap in X, the author proposes Y as the better explanation or approach. And third, we have the scope correction template. People think it's only about X. Actually, it has broader or narrow impact on Y. So you pick the main point template that fits, and you fill in the blanks in plain English. Now, there's a mix-up that often costs people points. It's purpose versus main point. These two types sound similar, but they are not the same thing. If you keep them separate, you're going to nuke 2 traps per passage at minimum. Main point is the what, and the purpose is the why. In other words, the main point is the author's claim about the subject, and the purpose is the author's reason for writing the passage. So if they're asking, what is the author ultimately arguing, you answer main point. But if they're asking, why did the author bother to write this at all, you're answering with purpose. Different questions and different answers. Main point usually shows up after the last pivot, right around thus, therefore, this suggests, or we should. Purpose is in the wrap-up or is implied by the movement of the passage. You're looking for phrases like accordingly, this reevaluates or clarifies or proposes. So main point is the destination and purpose is why you took the trip. Now here are a couple of purpose verbs. We have reassess, reevaluate, propose, clarify, correct, or synthesize. When you see an answer like to compare histogram bins across datasets, that is more like method. Purpose is more bigger picture, like to reassess or to synthesize or to clarify. Now we have organization questions, which are like asking for the X-ray of the passage. And these are often the easiest points in reading comp, if you've labeled the passage while you were reading. They're asking you, how is this thing built? If you can name each paragraph's job in 1 to 3 words, you can answer any organization question without rereading the whole passage. Setup is the context, the background, the problem statement, or the old view. Conflict is the pushback, the rival camp, the doubt, the however, and the resolution is the author's claim, the reframe, the synthesis, and the thus or therefore. Now, almost every correct organization answer is like a summary of the structure. So you want to listen for wording like introduces a commonly held view, presents evidence against it, and proposes a revised account, or provides historical context, raises an objection, and resolves it by reframing the issue, or states a problem, evaluates prior approaches, and advocates a new explanation. Wrong answers will swap conflict and resolution, mistake evidence for conclusion or example for thesis, or add in a 4th step that never happened. And so you want to be conscious of these common pitfalls. Now, I've got some questions here in the chat. Happy to get to as many as I can in the remaining time. Let's see. Chappelle Live asks, 4 years out of undergrad and have a master's GPA of 3.7 in business, registered for the January test. All right, cool. So we've got a month till January. 4 years out of undergrad means that undergraduate GPA is still somewhat relevant. Unfortunately, law schools do not consider master's GPA in calculating your LSAC GPA, unfortunately. Undergrad GPA is the only one that truly matters. And so I'm curious to know, what is your undergrad GPA, if you don't mind sharing. But ultimately, your focus going forward should be on the January LSAT prep. That's going to be the biggest factor in admission, so I would focus there. Happy to address follow-ups, or if you have questions or challenges regarding the January LSAT, happy to get to as many as I can. Okay, so I saw that you were asking, you said you got a 2.6 GPA, scored a 163 in November. Okay, so GPA is a bit on the lower side, as you're noting here. You're going to be a so-called splitter, balance a lower GPA with a higher LSAT. Being an NCAA athlete will definitely help. Of course, that's awesome. Include that in your resume, of course. Include it in your application essays. Talk about your experience in athletics. Law schools love to see that. It's also a good context to know that you worked 2 jobs while you were an athlete, and that could, of course, be a contributing factor, all of that, for the lower GPA. So I would write an addendum to explain that. But then you've got to, of course, balance it with a higher LSAT to give additional context and show that you do have the credentials and demonstrated proof to show that you can succeed in law school, you can succeed academically. It was just there were particular reasons or circumstances for the relatively lower GPA. And by the way, feel free to book a call with me if you want to talk through your personal situation for your January LSAT prep. For anybody out there watching this now or later, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons. Link below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Happy to help you out and craft a plan of attack for your LSAT prep whenever you're taking it, whether it's January, February, April, June, or beyond. Lush One's asking, can I get into any T14 with a 3.5 GPA? My LSAT's in the 170s, still worried about my GPA. So the T14 GPA medians are all 3.8 to 3.9. 3.5, of course, is below that, but you can balance it out with a higher LSAT. And so I'm curious, Lush One, if you've actually taken the LSAT officially. Is your 170 plus score theoretical, or is it practice, or is it concrete from test day itself? Let's make it concrete. Let's make it official so that you have it secured and you know that you have that to back you up and to help compensate for the below median GPA. The general rule of thumb is if your GPA is below the medians, you want your LSAT to be above to compensate. But if the LSAT's not a done deal, you've still got time to improve it and you can maximize your odds. You could still get into a T14. Ideally, of course, you want to be above the medians on both LSAT and GPA. If you're below on one, you just want to be above on the other. And I would also cast a wide net, blanket the T14, apply to every single one of the T14 and beyond, just to maximize your opportunities and expand the surface area of luck that you can count on. So it sounds like it's not concrete yet. You said most of my PTs are low 160s, but I'm confident it can be higher as I will take it in August. Okay, so your PTs right now are low 160s. You want to improve approximately 10 points or so, but you've got 8 months to get there. And so, yeah, the sky's the limit. You can really make anything happen between now and August. To improve 10 points, you could do it sooner, of course, but if you're giving yourself more time, that can only help. And yeah, reach out to me and we can talk through your situation more. I'm happy to meet with you personally and help craft a plan of attack. Link in my bio on TikTok. Unpluggedprep.com/start is the URL if you want to book a call. I'll be happy to help you out. Fatima Nazal is saying, can you give some advice about transferring to a different law school? Okay, so I would never count on transferring. I never recommend going to a law school that you wouldn't want to ultimately attend, because transferring is harder than you would think, and there's a certain inertia once you're already at a particular law school. But if you do want to transfer, the best thing you can do is maintain a high GPA at the law school that you are currently attending. So if you're already in law school, get the highest possible GPA in law school to show them, hey, I can do this, I can succeed, I will be an asset at your law school. I just need you to give me a chance, and I've already proven myself to some extent. Some folks will also even retake the LSAT to apply with stronger numbers. That might be another move that you could potentially pursue. I've helped students in that position as well. But first and foremost, maintain a high GPA in law school, then get a higher LSAT potentially as well to maximize your odds. Tom is asking, what's more important for a splitter, boosting your GPA or boosting your LSAT? boosting your LSAT. And the reason is that nearly every single law school weighs LSAT scores more heavily than undergraduate GPA. And so the best way to boost your odds of admission is to get a higher LSAT score. The good news is that it's also easier to boost your LSAT than it is to boost your GPA because your GPA is probably pretty fixed and you're spending approximately 4 years in undergrad to earn that GPA. So any individual class or semester will have a relatively marginal impact. But your LSAT score is only one single day and it weighs more heavily than all of undergrad combined. It's just 2.5 hours or so. And so one single day, 2.5 hours put into that day, plus maybe a practice test a week if you've already established a strong foundation, that might be all that you need to give yourself a higher LSAT. And so if you're considering an LSAT retake, I highly recommend it because through luck alone, you could do a few points better. And if you don't, no big deal because law schools only take the highest score on record. And if you're a splitter, that suggests that you already have a relatively low GPA. You want to just get a higher LSAT score to compensate. That's the best move at this point, probably, is just get a higher LSAT score. The LSAT's offered 8 times a year, so there's always another chance coming up to take it or retake it. Okay, you're saying it's a 2.7 GPA. Yeah, it's a bit low. I'll be frank. There's a lot of GPA inflation, grade inflation, and so might not be fair, might not be right, but it is what it is. But you're competing against folks who have 4.0 GPAs, 3.8 GPAs, 3.9 GPAs. Even outside the T14, a lot of GPA medians are in that 3.8, 3.9 range. So the best move you can make right now is probably just get a higher LSAT score. Divided's asking, how much does it hurt if my LSAT GPA is lower? Just because of my first semester? It's not going to kill you. I mean, law schools love to see an upward trend. And so if it was a first semester low GPA, you were adjusting to undergrad or had a personal matter, totally fine. The upward trend shows that it is not who you are today, and you have improved since then, so the proof's in the pudding. It shows up on your transcript. For anybody with a temporary dip or a low GPA, for whatever reason, you can always write an addendum. Short, concise, matter of fact, not excusing, just explaining. Couple sentences, concise. That's all you need to explain the low GPA, but the best proof is to get a higher LSAT score to show that your GPA does not reflect your true potential. And if you want to take more courses to help raise your GPA a little bit, you certainly can. That will help, but it's not going to have a massive impact. Even if you have a 2.7 GPA from your first 3 years of undergrad, taking a ton of classes later is not going to raise it to a 4.0. It could raise it to a 3.4, of course, and that's nice if you can raise it up a little bit, but the LSAT's going to have a bigger impact. And a higher LSAT can compensate for a relatively lower GPA, but we don't want to look at this in a vacuum. It's all relative to the school's median. So look at what the school's median is. If you have a 3.2 GPA divided and your target school's median is a 3.5, you're going to be below on the GPA, but you want to be above on the LSAT. And so if their LSAT median's a 160 and you get a 163, that's great. But if their LSAT median's a 165 and you get a 163, then you're going to be below on both. And that's not good enough. And so it's all relative to what the target school's medians are. Don't settle. Aim for the highest LSAT score possible. In my view, never any reason to aim for anything less than a 180, of course. But consider the time that you have, where you are now, and what you can put into this relative to where you want to be. And if you want my help acing the LSAT, getting into the best school possible, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody out there watching this. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Happy to help you out. Open offer now or later. Elle is asking, chances if you're below both medians? Not great. I mean, considering that law school admissions is primarily numbers driven, it's LSAT, then it's GPA, then everything else. And I'm not saying there's never anybody who does not outperform their numbers. There are people who have incredible backgrounds, incredible stories, and their essays and resume or letters of rec just kill it for them and help them get in. But ultimately, it's going to be a long shot if you're below the numbers on both. But there's no reason to apply in that situation because even if your GPA is where it's at right now, you can get a higher LSAT to make up for it. You can retake. Law schools will still take your LSAT in January or February. It is not too late. You've still got a month till January, 2 months till February, plenty of time to improve your LSAT score significantly. And if you're looking for more help, of course, you can book the free call with me, link below the video, free LSAT tutoring lessons for everybody out there. I'm also running these free lives every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. If you find this helpful, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth, so please share it on your socials. Really appreciate your support. I'll see you all tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.